Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Baseball Podcast, brought to you by MasterCard. We're here with a rare special. We're not sponsored by MasterCard. A rare special crossover event. A crossover event, guys. Meth, Ethan, do you want to tell them who's our first contender in this bout?
All right, our first contender. We're coming off a sad U.S. loss, but an exciting Australia win to send them on to the second round, and they will be facing Cuba, who just barely got into the second round based on a lot of math that nobody really understands. So we're having on Phil Selig. We just had him on a little while ago of Cuba Dugout fame. He's a Cuban baseball expert, and he's here to tell us all about what he thinks of the upcoming matchup. And then we're going to bridge the gap between the two teams. We're going to bring on Dan Vaughan, who we had on about a year ago. He's the play-by-play voice of the Perth Heat, also for the Kansas City Monarchs of the American Association, and he's been involved in baseball in Australia for over a decade. He's got a ton of experience in that regard, and he's here to give us the Australian perspective. And it's just going to be a lot of fun talking to these guys, getting their thoughts on what they think is going to happen, why each of their teams is going to win, and somebody's going to end up wrong, and hopefully it'll be us, Tom, because we're morons. So that'll be a lot of fun.
Right.
Anything you want to say before we get started with the interviews?
Really just, I'm really looking forward to these two characters playing off each other. We haven't done I guess Sean O'Dell was kind of a crossover event, but this is sort of a crossover event of two guests that we have had on before, and it just so happened that their teams are meeting in the quarterfinals. And frankly, the way that the World Baseball Classic's going, as you mentioned, the United States just didn't show up against Mexico. It's anybody's game. So it's going to be really interesting to hear what they have to say. We're going to talk a little bit about the countries and also about the maybe how they think the game's going to go, maybe get some predictions at the end. And I hope you guys come away with this with a better understanding of Australia, Cuba than you went in, which could be hard because, as we know, these are the two top teams in the tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I needed something to buoy my spirits because I watched the U.S. get crushed last night, and now I have on the Israel-Puerto Rico game in the background, and that's 6-0 Puerto Rico with nobody out in the fourth.
Whoa!
So
I gotta say, we talked about Joey Meneses when we were discussing Mexico. We talked about how I thought it was Joey Meneses, and it sounds like a disease. The United States came down with a really bad case of Joey Meneses last night.
That was a terminal case of Joey.
That was awful.
Stage 4.
When
Joey.
He came up, when it was what 4-1.
I don't want to talk about it.
But he came up with two guys on, and I was like, he's going to hit another home run, isn't he? He's going to do it, and then, yep. It's exactly what happened.
Why couldn't you use that clairvoyance for good? Why couldn't you be like, Mike Trout's going to go yard here and then see that?
Trout, listen, people were hard on Trout on Reddit. Trout didn't play that bad. He got on base 3 times. Yeah, it's a little hard to get mad at that.
Yeah, poor Jeff McNeil made a hell of an effort just to get to all of those balls. And then and then people were getting on him for his defense. That wasn't Jeff McNeil's fault.
Yeah, you know what I say to that?
We're not here to talk.
I look at those people and I say this.
How much more betrayal can I take?
And then I follow it up with a little.
I despise him.
That's what I think of those people.
We're not here to talk U.S. because I'm going to slit my wrists if we keep talking about it. We're
going to talk about a team that we like that is doing good.
Yeah, that is doing well, Team Australia. So let's hop into the interview. I hope you guys enjoy this talk with Phil and Dan, and go follow them both. So I don't know if you two are familiar with each other's work, but Dan, you work in the ABL, obviously, and the American Association, and you're an Aussie baseball expert. Phil is the guy on Cuban baseball, so I figured it might be fun to just get everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really cool deal for Dave and the boys. And sorry, let me slide that over. And again, I heard y'all's conversation about the whole tiebreaker deal, and I got to tell you, I didn't dive into it yesterday because it was giving me a headache, and now I do have a headache because it's like,
as it should.
And with all the links, because WBC has the links, MLB has the links, and Advanced Media has the links, and it was just really convoluted. And I don't know. All I would say is I hope they can. It's hard to explain that. It's just a hard thing to explain to fans, and that's just
Right.
It is what it is, I guess. You know,
some of the language that they use too, that you're like, who is this for? So
yeah, and then it's like, oh, how'd Cuba win the pool? I
Trust
don't
them.
know.
well, the thing about it is you get some, like, there was some journalists and they're doing their job who wrote, oh gosh, maybe Friday, when Cuba was 0-2, well, they're probably, I'm not going to go forward. And then it was like Korea sort of the same. That was sort of where Korea was headed too, because it was obviously didn't make it because Australia won. But there was that scenario possibly in the works between Czech, Korea, and Australia. And you're like, well, wait, you beat a tough team, and then you're gonna wind up. Now, how's this? You might not make it, and it's hard to explain that. I had several people reach out to me, and they were like, "Well, explain that to me," and I'm like, "Well, I wish I could."
So, Phil, do you want to give a quick rundown of how Cuba got here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if you can wrap your head around it.
How did Cuba get here? I wrote an article about it, and I might have to go back and reread that. But just in quick terms, obviously, game one, tight loss to Netherlands, who has become their bugaboo over the past decade. And through the first two games, I guess the major issue was runner in scoring position fail, specifically from Moncada and Rober. Who looked maybe a little too aggressive, and you're almost saying, is this a harbinger for how their seasons are going to go? So then they drop a heartbreaker to Italy in extra innings in the second game. The one thing you can say is both games they got more than they could have expected out of their starters, and Yariel Rodriguez and Roenis Elias, who were both dynamite and gave them everything that they could out of the 65 pitch limit, and then some solid work out of the bullpen in spots. Couple leaky oil performances, but nothing too serious, or nothing that you don't look at and think that maybe you adjust that moving forward. So obviously they flipped the script and put a beating on Panama, 13-4, and with 21 hits, and that spread and those hits and kind of I think played well into some of the calculations and the tiebreakers, which I think at one point they had to send off to NASA to figure out how that works. So that put them into a spot at 1-2. That with the way that the rest of the pool was breaking down, that everybody was kind of in that same scenario, hovering at 2-1, 1-2. So they went into the last game against Taiwan and handled their business 7-1, which apparently was the perfect score to have that run differential to put them at 2-2, for the rest of the pool to go 2-2, which remarkably vaulted Cuba to the number 1 spot. And now they move on to Tokyo, and we'll face Australia.
It was a crazy ride. It was a lot of math. Everybody, me included, had Cuba, dead on arrival after the first two losses. But
we talked about them on here. We were like, listen, Cuba's got to look in the mirror. They got to decide, like, hey, how do they want to handle this whole political issue that keeps a lot of their best players from playing for them? And then Cuba went, I'm gonna skip the mirror check and I'm gonna win the pool.
We were wrong. And I'll say it. I apologize to Cuba. I apologize to you, Phil. Yeah. And how about you? You want to real fast just tell us how Australia got here for the first time?
You are asking me? Well, yeah, really. And I haven't got this on record, but there's a lot of what you got to understand about Australia's coaching makeup is there's a lot of familiarity, because you've got Dave Nielsen. Obviously, he manages Brisbane. His right-hand man is Jim Bennett, who's the pitching coach, but Jim also manages in the American Association. His bullpen coach is Graham Lloyd. Michael Collins, who's a bullpen coach for the Astros, longtime Canberra manager. He's very familiar with those guys. You've got your Adelaide manager as well. You've got a lot of guys who are Michael Graham, who was a longtime Tigers manager in their organization. You got a lot of familiar guys who know the roster. A lot of times I just use the Chinese as an example. You got one guy who comes in as a manager from somewhere else, and you got a lot of guys who are local, but you don't really have that mesh. These guys all know the Australian game plan. And so my answer to you is kind of long-winded, but they chose to go young in game one against Korea. Jack O'Loughlin, who's a kid with the Tigers organization, got the start in the clincher for Adelaide in the Claxton Shield on that Sunday last month. He went, and then Mitch Noonborn is a kid from Perth, but plays for Adelaide, pitch behind him and piggyback roll, kind of almost like you see in a spring training or a doubleheader. You get a piggyback roll, but you got your two best arms, and they're both younger guys. They weren't, Tim Atherton, who went home, or Warwick Saupold, who a lot of folks thought would get a nod there as well, or Sam Holland. Older guys, they didn't get the nod that opener. And then when they needed the clincher last night, they did the very same thing again. I think that's piece number one for them, is that they're not afraid to throw the young guns out there with the veterans. I mean, Tim Kennelly, he's all of a sudden becoming a well-known name worldwide, but anybody that knows Australian baseball, he's the greatest of all time in modern memory. And then you throw in guys like Alex Hall, a Brewers farmhand, and you got some guys like that, Logan Wade,
Glendening.
Robbie Glendening is probably as close to getting the big leagues as anybody in that roster right now, and he's really battling. Played the SEC at Missouri. This is a kid that went the college route, so you've got a good mix. But I really think the gamble to roll those younger guys on Thursday, Friday, and they also have the advantage of playing the Japanese before in exhibition games back in the fall and also last spring as well. And these kids, Alex Hall is the world. That's not a big moment for them. Playing in front of 46,000 Japanese fans, they've done that before. Granted, they didn't win the game, but playing against Korea in the same building, there's some familiarity with. So I just think really more than anything, they're growing up, and they did the little things right. I mean, situational bullpen was phenomenal. They hit the ball. They're always going to hit the ball. The Australians have done that over the years. And it's always been the depth of pitching, and finally getting some young kids to step up. That's been big. It's been big for them. And I that's why I even tweeted today, in a 1-game sample size, they're going to probably roll out that same strategy again. And hey, it got us 2 wins. Let's get us a third.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way I think they're going. But
yeah, it was a miracle run. Now, I do want to ask, because Cuba's obviously a team that has been here before. They've had a strong program for a long time. Australia's here for the first time. Phil, what's your impression of the Australian team as it matches up to the Cuban team? And then Dan, why don't you go after that?
Well, I mean, you can't discredit anybody for making it this far, despite the fact that I think that everybody can look at and see, and we led off talking about the variability in the tournament so far, which is exciting for the fan base. So, as Dan has said there, obviously you look at that and you realize that there's professional pedigree permeating from the top down, even if not necessarily through the entire player body. And so far the guys, clearly have not been afraid of the moment. So, there's a level of, I think if you're Cuba, I wonder if you just with a little bit of time to think here, you'll do some scouting, but I do think you worry more about your own kind of game, your own sort of game plan and what you do. And hopefully that those last 2 games and the approach there is more, or if you could take an amalgam, because Yariel Rodriguez is probably going to get the ball in game 1 or sorry, in the 1 game as he did in game 1. And so, if you could take his pitching performance or any reasonable facsimile with the approach that the offense had in game 3 and game 4, which was really buoyed, I think, by obviously maybe they caught up to the pitching, maybe it was jet lag, but even the approach for Rober, who, I kind of joked with a few people in the first 2 games, had the plate discipline of a house cat chasing a laser pointer, and so, but to his credit, I've seen it before, and I shared videos. I've documented him from his time in Cuba, seen him in Canada before, and have even recorded him in the past, that in the same at bat, he can look in the first couple pitches as if, dear Lord, this guy's supposed to be this stud. And then in that third pitch just stays in there and does damage. So, it's a little bit disappointing that it took him 2 games to do that at this point where he is in his career. But again, if that was rust, it was that. But if he is now locked in after a few bats, that's dangerous. They got great performances from a few other spots in that lineup. Again, once you got to game 3, and, in typical baseball fashion, in the first couple games, the 2 guys that weren't supposed to be in the lineup did the majority of the damage, and Yoelqui Guerber and Yadil Mujica, who had some good at-bats. So, through that lineup, I think now that you've got a better idea of what that configuration is, there's hopefully a little bit of a better idea of what everybody's role is, and they'll kind of settle in and just, kind of instead of trying to hit 5-run home runs, just do what they need to in each at bat.
And I think the great thing about this whole WBC is the great mystery And I remember going back a couple of years ago. I was in Gary, Indiana, broadcasting with the Railcats, and we were playing the Quebec team. They had a ton of Cuban players. And as a broadcaster, you're trying to do broadcast prep, and there wasn't a lot out there, right? I mean, there wasn't a lot out there. And I think you look at the Czech team, and you're like, who are these guys? I mean, and you look at these Australian team, well, who are these guys? I mean, you're suddenly there's even in the World Wide Web we have today, there's still not a lot out there sometimes, especially when you get to lower levels. You know, ABL's got advanced media with Major League, but you start getting to these other countries that don't have that same level of stat keeping. It makes it harder to scout. There are videos out there and all that. I say all that saying when I asked Dave Nielsen this on our show Talking Baseball Australia, I asked him back in the fall. It's like, you're in the death pool with Japan and Korea. You know, I'm like, you know, and he's like, well, mate, you know, and he's told me this before, so I kind of knew the response is going to be is they're all death pool. I mean, they're all tough pools. Everybody's tough. I mean, you get the World Baseball Classic, and you're one of the teams in the Classic, and you go the next round. They're all good, right? And I think that's sort of the Australian approach is that they're going to do what they do. And do what they do best, do what they do. I don't know if the scouting is in depth as it has been over the years. I mean, Cuba's that great mystery. I mean, even as a broadcaster over the years, I've dove into the Cuban story, and I even done Negro League research from with the museum in Kansas City, and I've gone back and looked at even some of those stats from back in the 1930s. I've got a lot of asterisks and things and not sure what's there. So there's a great mystery there, and I think that makes it fun. But I think for Dave and company, you do what you've done, which is the things you've done. It'd be Japanese, Korea, whoever, the state of Oklahoma, whoever they play, right. They're gonna play the same way regardless. And if they do the things they're supposed to do, they'll come out on top. They do the things they don't do, they're gonna wind up on a 7-1 deficit like against Japan, even a game that I thought they battled against. So I think scouting wise, and I'm sure they've got enough of a hold on, especially, and I know this for conversation I've had before, the under 23s, under 18s, and all those younger World Cups. There's been a lot of scouting going on to those too, and they've taken extensive scouting notes, and some of that will translate to this WBC.
Yeah, I think you nailed it when you talked about how Australia, and this is something that I've thought, is how Australia sort of was lined up in such a way that you almost wanted to be in the pool with two good teams, because if you can somehow sneak out a win, then you can handle China and Korea and the Czech Republic, you can get in. If they're in a pool like with Cuba and Italy and the Netherlands and a bunch of average teams, you're probably going to rack up another loss or two. So I guess I'll just ask, you think they can sneak out another one against Cuba? I'm assuming they're going to go to Jack O'Loughlin again.
I would think so with the time off. No, I did message Dave and Jim, the time difference here from Texas there. I haven't heard back officially, but I would expect that's what they would do. They're not afraid to throw anybody, but I just think they're not afraid to throw young guys either, and they did that already this series or this pool play as well. But that's what I expect them to do. It's what brought them. They got their two big wins: the signature win against Korea, which was one that I got to tell you, to me, the win of the Czech Republic was historic in a sense that was a big win to clinch a second round for the first time. Right. But beating Korea and the way they did with clubbing the ball around the ballpark, holding on, some tight pitching, the defense to end the ball game with the caught stealing. I mean, the way they won that thing against the team that had given them trouble, and the team that a lot of people figured, well, I mean, they just kind of, if you're playing brackets in this thing like you do the tournament with the basketball, you'd have just penciled in Korea, right? I mean, who wouldn't? And I think that they're not going to change anything what brung them. And I think in a one-game sample size, there's no reason why Australia can't do this. And I had a fan tweet me today or message me today about, I think it was a 2004 Cuba-Australia matchup where Cuba came back and won. And I don't remember the exact details of that ball game, but he was like, well, is there a revenge factor there? Well, some of those kids that are on the roster probably don't even know about the 2004. Now there'll be some older guys. I'm sure Dave Nielsen will know about that, but that was sort of from a fan's perspective. But I don't think anything more than the fact that what's so much fun about this is you get these knockout rounds. Anything can happen. I mean, you roll out there, and the odds makers and punters can say what they want to say, but you got to play the game. And Cuba wears uniforms, so does Australia, and they both could have the game of their life or could have the dreadful performance, and that's what makes this so much fun.
Yeah, I think it is it is really cool to see, like Cuba does have some major leaguers. They got some ex-major leaguers. Australia has some guys who, are in the minors. ABL has some prospects in it, but you're not looking at like a quarterfinal with two teams that are just loaded with MLB players, which is, the way it usually goes. Like the teams that have the most MLB players just cruise. So this is kind of a unique occurrence in World Baseball Classic history. So it's going to be really cool to watch this.
I think that's fun. I think that, to me, that gives the Australians, and I'll even sit there, and if I'm the Czech Republic or if I'm New Zealand or South Africa or insert any country trying to build their program, and you're watching what Israel's been doing and Italy's been doing, you're saying, well, you know what? Those people can do it too. Why not us? I mean, they don't have a ton of big leagues. I mean, there's Mark Suppold made a pretty good living in the big leagues and in the KBO, but you're right. Australia's not littered with big league names. I mean, Alex Hall had a cup of coffee with the Brewers last year, and then that's pretty much, outside of that, it's been pretty limited. Well, Aaron Whitefield, but that's pretty much limited to what you've got right now. I mean, you've got more big league experience in your dugout with Graham Lloyd and Dave Nielsen. I mean, you got a guy that was the setup man with the Yankees in the World Series, so you got that. But again, I think it's expiring, and for me, the bigger thing is Americans, and we know how Americans are. I mean, I'm a Texan first, but American as well.
Right.
We kind of take this WBC thing kind of for granted. We're kind of like, meh, well, I mean,
yeah,
it's cool and all, but the importance of some of these countries, Cuba, because the game is such a passion in Cuba, Australia, where the game is trying to be grown, and there's a youngster in Cuba, there's a youngster in Brisbane who's sitting there going, baseball's not a bad route after all. Maybe I won't play cricket or footy, and I will do the baseball thing because I'm loving doing it, because there's a pathway to that where the World Baseball Classic maybe 20 years ago, that pathway wasn't there. And in this Cuban situation, that pathway wasn't there for most of my adult life. Cubans didn't play the big leagues, and now you're seeing it. So things have changed, I think, really for the WBC. And I love the fact that we don't have – I love Mike Trout to death. I love Ohtani to death. But I love the fact that we've got a Tim Cannelli and Ulrich Majowski playing from Perth, and that they're guys that you might have known, you might not have known. And that's okay, because they're doing something at a high stage, and I love it for our game in Australia.
Yeah, and they're going up against a lot of the same kind of guys from Cuba. Like a lot of guys really aren't going to know who Jariel Rodriguez is. They're not going to know Yoelkis is Cespedes' brother, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Am I making that up?
Yeah. So Yoenis and Yoelkis are half brothers.
Yeah, okay. But like there's, Bolanos, I don't think anybody knows who he is. Like there's guys on the Cuban team who have that same factor as the Australians. So it's like, I've never really seen these guys, but like they're not bad at baseball.
Right.
And that, especially for, lifer fans like us, that's a lot more fun than just, sometimes watching like Venezuela go up against like DR or like more often than not, it's with the US. It just kind of feels like kids just mashing their toys together. Like, oh, I got all the best players, and you also have all the best players. Let's just and see what happens. But this is like you're gonna get two different styles of the game. Two entirely different cultures. Countries with entirely different histories, and
Tom,
they're on a collision.
Can I jump in? Something I was thinking about a while ago. I hate to jump in here, but I was thinking about this earlier. And I don't like to compare this to soccer because they're not the same game.
Right,
but it's funny as a fan because U.S. men's team, they're okay. The women's team really good, but the men's team, but when I get drawn into the World Cup in soccer is when those storylines like you're talking about, the storylines of the different style of maybe it's the team from Nigeria against the long time against the English who they haven't done it since the Stone Age. That whole storyline gets me involved, and I mean, yeah, we could sit there and watch the big leaguers, watching Mexico bash around the U.S. last night, who looked very disinterested. But in that situation,
I don't want to talk about it.
Did you that story? Honestly, last night I watched just enough to get the feeling of it. but I was glued to the story of Australia and the Czech Republic because not just my ties with Australia, but the fact that the Czech Republic had their media relations guy out there, and they had these storylines of guys that how they picked the game up and things I'd read about. To me, that was interesting, and I think that's where this whole World Baseball Classic, because there's going to be those storylines for the Cubans as well, and there's that great mystery of who's who, and I love that. I mean, the game needs more of this because the game is at the major league level has had some staleness, and we need something fresh like this, and we need the storylines. We need the storylines that will attract younger and even older viewers. People that are like, hey, I haven't watched baseball in 25 years, but boy, that the right fielder that's a fireman in Perth is pretty cool. That's a pretty cool story, right?
Yeah.
He actually plays. Well, I mean, he's pretty daggone good. He's been playing forever. So, I mean, there's that storyline. So, anyway, I didn't mean to jump on you there, Tom.
No, it's fine. Phil, what's their reaction been like in Cuba? Are they going all out like maybe the countries like in other parts of Latin America are? Because they and even like Taiwan, they've been just going bonkers for this sort of thing.
I think it's been a little bit more sedated just because of the timings and because the economy's tough right now, and there is a level where Cuban baseball has been in a little bit of a doldrum. So make no mistake about it, people are still proud. I mean, I chat with people on the island frequently, and getting messages asking if I'm up watching. And one of the things that I did inquire was, are people gathering? I don't think they are yet, but I'd be intrigued and talking to friends that we'll see if they might for Wednesday. There have been strains. I mean, and I'm not going to lie and say that there isn't a level that disappoints me sometimes, that when I go to the island more frequently, there is international soccer on television. And again, whether or not because it was the timings, I had friends sending photos of big events for the World Cup final. And, perhaps if Cuba gets further, I think you'll see that it ramps up. I can say that people are definitely interested. I mean, it's the web traffic is growing. The number of groups that I'm in, and some of my content as well reaches as far as the island, even if it's more for an Anglo audience. So I think that the average Cuban fan has been on the same roller coaster that I have. That after those first two games, thinking, oh no, more of the same of everything that we've seen. Not that anybody thought that this was going to be a complete cure-all, but kind of if I'll tie into, I think that the danger and where Australia has more than a puncher's chance is it's a team that maybe doesn't have as much pressure on them for the sake that Cuba is still probably supposed to be here. Versus Australia not supposed to be here, earn their way here, and so now playing with house money, could become that bigger story. And if the guys weren't, as you say, weren't blinded by the lights playing in the Tokyo Dome against Japan and being able to come across, hopefully don't wither under the lights there. So we'll see. From the get-go, and I think a lot of people would agree with me on this assessment on the island and off, that it is still very important Cuba to win this game. Whatever happens, if they make it to Miami, is gravy. But even now, you see the way that they played, and even as we discussed, it took an immense amount of luck to get here. Maybe they'll realize how lucky they were and keep that momentum going. And then if you go look at the way that the other brackets are playing, so it's just you can't think more than one game ahead. It's almost a little bit more of a football mentality, and sometimes you're only as good as your next day starting pitcher. So Cuba's starting rotation looks strong at this point, which going in was the thing that I had more concern and seems to be alleviated. And then the way that the schedule works, that overall pitching depth, I think, plays well for them. But if the big bats they've gotten rid of that jet lag, if they're focused, I think Cuba can do a lot of damage and get to at least a spot in Miami that I think the average Cuban baseball fan is going to look and say, this is good. Now let's build the momentum, and hopefully next time we'll bring in more of the pros, or if those dollars or some other changes can come along to put more into Cuban baseball infrastructure. But let's begin the healing process.
So Phil, one thing that I wanted to ask you about is, I feel like one of the things that Australia has is they don't have a lot of high velocity pitchers. They have a lot of guys who are sort of, for lack of a better term, junk ballers. And one of the things I think is interesting is Cuba has sort of a mix. They have a couple of NPB guys who throw really hard, and they also have some junk ballers like Onelki Garcia or whoever, you know? So do you think that's going to throw Cuba off at all because they've been facing guys like the effervescent Matt Harvey, or do you think they'll be able to handle it?
So it really depends, because if you look at the kind of the breakdown on the lineup, and perhaps in those first couple games, maybe that was the adjustment that a Moncada and a Rober had to make. The slower velocity plays well to some of the guys that might mix in that from the Cuban National Series. So if a Yoelkis Guiber is in there, to a lesser extent, if a Yadiel Mujica and an Aribel Arubuena are in there for the sake that, the guys that have made it as far as AAA or to the majors, but realistically spending the majority of their time now either between Cuba but also in Mexico. So I mean, it's adjusting to anything, and again, I think it's just the approach going into it, that if they're not jumping out of their shoes, I think that there's a couple guys in there that could potentially do some damage that you wouldn't suspect, for seeing something that's probably a little bit closer to what they are used to, versus one of the biggest changes we saw, for instance, in the Premier 12, when it was more of a roster comprised completely of National Series stars, that when you start facing those guys throwing 94, 95, 96, you don't see that on the island. You see that in the guys that are leaving the island. You see that in the guys from the island that, as you mentioned, are part of the Japanese system there. But, if guys, I think the average velocity, you see some numbers here and there, but I look at it through this lens that I saw recently, that I believe that the average velocity in NPB was only 89 or 90, and it is ticking up. But that to me tells me that Cuba's probably 85, 86. And so there is a cohort of players in there that I think that, or in a pinch hitting situation might be more accustomed to that, but that can be overcome with at the same time. Yeah, if the guys that are used to facing harder are jumping out of their shoes, hopefully we've already made that adjustment, and we've seen in game 3 and game 4 that we're ready to stop doing that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Dan, I'll just flip the question back to you. Do you think Cuba is going to struggle with some of the high velocity guys that Cuba has, or do you think they'll be able to handle it since they did take on Japan and Korea earlier?
Yeah, I think the big thing is going to be in, something I had a random conversation the other day with a high school pitching coach who was just saying, my team doesn't throw real hard, but we get a lot of movement and we change speeds and location, and a lot of times you overcome if your lack of velocity. And Australia's not going to blow you away with you're not looking at triple digits here from a pitching standpoint, but you're going to get they tend to pitch more of a North American style, non-strikeout style, meaning a lot of ground balls, a lot of four seams, a lot of things down the zone, trying to induce the ground ball, trying to get you on top of things, and the movement, that's going to be real key. From an offensive standpoint, the ABL as a league, there's some 90s in there. There's some 95, 96s in there. There's been some imports that have come over, especially in recent memory. But in general, it's the guys, the Alex Halls, players like that, Whitefields, who are facing, and Glenn Denning, who are facing, major league prospects who should adjust fairly well. And to me, it's always been, it's the adjustment at bat to at bat. It's the in-game adjustment. And I think one thing Australia has done a phenomenal job of, and this is all really from Dave's approach to hitting as a big leaguer, Dave Nielsen, is the at-bat to at-bat approach. And I think that's going to be a real big key. But they're going to see velocity like they haven't seen in, maybe since Japan. I mean, the Japanese and Koreans threw hard, but you're getting a lot more movement, a lot more deception, a lot more different arm slots. You're going to see arm slots and deception and Sevilla coming at you, and it'll be interesting to see if Australia can adjust to that. I think they will, because the guys who play in North America see that already. Now, it's the young guys who may be playing club ball may have to adjust a bit to it, but hey, I think this club, especially fastball hitting, is a good fastball hitting club, like most clubs are. But I think this is going to be a step up in velocity, because every time I've seen and everything I've read about the Cuban, arms, I mean, we're talking about guys that they're throwing gas and getting movement at the same time, and that's lethal. That's lethal. So it'll be interesting adjustment. That's the one thing, and I think Phil said, I mean, their rotation it's a 1-game series, but you've got to win that one game. So you've got some depth down there. They're going to be able to roll arm after arm after arm at you, and that's going to be the real challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's gonna be a really interesting matchup between different styles. One thing that we do when we've had on some experts, talking about WBC teams, who do you guys think is going to be the Silver Slugger from your team, and who do you think is going to be the Cy Young? Dan, why don't you go first?
Well, so far it's kind of a toss-up. A couple people have already said, Robbie Glendenning has been that guy. Alex Hall, who was the Helms winner in Australia. Those two gentlemen have just had phenomenal WBCs so far. I would think that would be the case. Boy, arm-wise, the one thing with the arm thing is that this has been more. And I'm going to go back to the American Association, and Ethan, you may remember this a couple years ago. Sioux City had a really good ball club, record-setting ball club back in like 2016 or 15, and they had a lot of really good arms, but they didn't go the distance. There was not really one guy. It was a collection of guys. They'd go out there and give you 4 innings, guy gives you 2, and they pieced it together with a phenomenal pitching staff. That's sort of been the way with Australia. I mean, in general, I mean, Mitch Newborn, I think, has the best stuff. I would love to see Glogowski with a little more length. He hadn't had a chance, but 2 innings. It's a little tougher call there, but I suppose if I was going to be put on the jump here, I would say probably Jack O'Loughlin, because he's got you 2 starts. If this team wins Wednesday, O'Loughlin would have got you at least 2 or 3 innings to get you going. And to me, that's about a total of 9 innings he's got you in this series, and that'd be pretty good for me for a Cy Young type award winner in the pool in that first quarterfinal game.
For sure. How about you, Phil? Who you got for Cuba?
So last time we spoke, I mentioned that the player that I had my eye on was Yariel Rodriguez, despite the fact that I didn't necessarily love the way that he was employed, but I can't argue with the results. And so, I mean, clearly he's settled into that role for a guy that was a starter in Cuba, but has found great success in a more of a setup role in Japan with Junichi, and even some of that might be more just to the logjam being blocked, in fact, by Raidel Martinez. So his path, because if I can, a little bit of a side, a lot of people automatically jumped on and said this guy's got to get to the majors. That might be his aspiration, but at the same time, I think that undersells the fact that the talent, the ability, and the decent money that there is in Japan. And this is a guy that is making $550,000 a year now, able to bring most of that back to Cuba. That's not a small thing, and a guy that, if he continues on his rise and maybe can find a role, could become a closer and be making millions of dollars in a couple of years. Just a consideration on that. If he pitches anywhere like he did in game 1, where he was throwing hard, he had the wipeout slider. He showed a little bit of the flaw in his game, which is maybe what used to be control issues now at least is kind of effectively wild. I kind of joked and said that the hardest contact against him was the 2 hit by pitch in that game. So if he shows up anyway, after that performance that he had, and can give you, and I'm assuming he's getting the start here. I mean, that might be a play where Cuba could look at and say they want to go with Elias, who is probably more comfortable as a starter, and then you could go to Rodriguez. Either which way, I have the feeling he's going to be having a big impact in this game. In terms of batters, a guy who looked a little bit resurgent, a guy who's been here before, all-time leader in World Baseball Classic home runs, and maybe because he represents that insulation in that lineup, and might be the guy that, if you have to pick your poison, if Moncada, if Rober, if an Andy Ibanez is healthy and lengthens that lineup up, that if you're looking at that guy that you have to pick to your poison against, might be Alfredo Despain, who looked like he still has something in the tank and might get those opportunities, hitting a little bit down in the lineup, and hopefully with guys on in front of him, and has obviously been at this level before, even though he's no spring chicken. So those are two of the guys that I look at and think are kind of the keys.
Yeah, I think that's great stuff. I think Cuba's probably the favorite here, but Dan, I think you've done a good job explaining exactly why Australia, has a puncher's chance, like Phil said. One thing I want to ask you guys is, you're both obviously experts on each, national team. You guys are both North American, but you spend a lot of time in these respective countries. You guys have anything you want to ask each other about the other teams?
I think it's interesting, Phil, because these two teams have interesting stories. Cuba, he was mentioning earlier, and I love because I last year flying from Miami to Belize City, we were flying right over Cuba, right on the coastline. I'm looking down there, going, "That's a baseball mad country down there. That's a country that loves the great game." Australia, and what's interesting is that there's a lot of pressure there for Team Cuba. I'd like to know more about that. I mean, is it a fan thing? Is it a government thing? I mean, what is the pressure? Is it all things? Because they seem like, because Australia, I mean, Graham Lloyd can walk down the streets of Melbourne and see a tall 6'11" guy, right? I mean, they don't know he's a former New York Yankee. I mean, Tim Kennelly, he walks in the middle of Perth. No one knows he plays baseball. I mean, it's a different atmosphere in Australia. Baseball's probably number 11 on the pecking order. So I guess my question to you, Phil, is that pressure they're getting, is that all things, fans, government, the team, organizational? Where is that coming from?
Well, I mean, it depends who's perceiving that pressure. Because I mean, you have a few guys here, obviously now that are professionals, and it's they. I look at it more for the lens, and actually have had some good conversations, and some of it validates my perception of I think what's going on the island. Because I mean, some people are going to say, "Hey, you're just a gringo going visit there. What do you know about the politics?" Or I've been accused of being a champagne socialist before, and my love is for the people and is for the baseball, and the politics. I get it, but also understand, because if this is going to be a catalyst for massive change, although there are very positive things happening here, it's just a small step. And that small step could turn into a big step. But until the government writ large kind of changes a lot of what they do, I don't think we're going to see massive changes. So I might have mentioned this when we chatted before, that it's the same as any crop. If you stop fertilizing it, eventually it's going to go away. And so a lot of, which will sound ironic because there's more Cuban baseball talent than ever, but they're starting on the island, they're getting out sooner, they're going somewhere else. So the pressure, I don't know if it exists quite like it did. And for the sake that there is a level where there are definite expectations, but I think the guys realize they're kind of playing with house money. They never thought that this was a moment that was going to occur with the construction of this team. And so hopefully with the balance of the other guys, I mean, I do have a couple of acquaintances that are on the team, and even though there's a little bit of a language barrier, I've been sending some messages back and forth, and they seem to be enjoying themselves. And actually, what I love to see is a couple of those guys are getting more of an opportunity to play than I thought they might have. And so, a lot of what I write about is to capture every element from the history. You mentioned that the Negro Leagues have done some videos, have done some writing on that connection, even to trying to trace the roots back to originally, how baseball got started. And there is a level where baseball is important to Cuba when you understand that Cuba was born out of revolution. First, it was that baseball was brought over by a couple of students or Cubans that were students in I think it was in Alabama, and brought the game back, and it quickly took off. And there's a level of it that it was anti-Spanish. So where if bullfighting and soccer were more popular, being occupied by the Spanish as they were, and eventually through the Spanish American War for Cuban independence, baseball at that point actually was often more of an event based and a fundraiser for the war effort. So you grow out of that, baseball's entrenched that way, and then the states come in and are perceived as some of the same, and then over time, a lot of the regaling of Castro as a baseball player, it's overblown. I think he enjoyed sport. He played baseball. He was never a prospect. There's anything like that, but saw it as a great opportunity, as something that had unified the country before, and to do that. So that's part of that lifeblood, but at the same time, and with all of the strains, and the World Baseball Classic actually is the perfect pivot point. That first World Baseball Classic in 2006 is where Cuba went from that, hey, there's some guys that have gotten out before, we think that there's a level of talent there, to these guys can compete. These guys can compete against the world. They can compete against pros. And then subsequently, it opened up opportunities for scouts and for other people to kind of get in their ear. And as the dollars came out, that players started playing more for currency than for country. And so that set off a trickle. And right now, it's very tough on the island. for the sake that we're in as tough an economic period with COVID and with hitching their wagon to Venezuela, which anybody could have told you that wasn't a good strategy, but that during COVID, basically cutting out the tourist industry, that right now is as tough as since the collapse of the USSR, and so more and more players are leaving. Yes, some are having an impact, some are in leagues all across the world, but there's more that are leaving just purely because it's their ticket just off the island, even if they never make it playing baseball. So there's a lot of pressures. Baseball, there's still a large contingent of people that like it, but even more, I think younger kids are seeing more international soccer on TV. They see it as that international cool brand. If you go around Havana, you're going to see more people wearing a Messi or Ronaldo jersey or a LeBron jersey than an Industrialis jersey. You do see some major league jerseys trickle in, but those are hard to come by. But it's I think that this is going to be a shot in the arm. People are the politics have largely stayed out of it for now. We'll see what happens when the dust settles. And winning can heal a lot of wounds, can cure a lot of ills. And I think that really what the average Cuban is excited to see is that everybody that they can look at it and say, yes, he might have left, but he is Cuban. He is my countryman, and our team can compete the way that it used to, and rebuild some of that over time, hopefully.
Yeah, it's amazing that the storylines between the two, and I opened up my eyes the last couple of years to the story of the rich history of baseball in Cuba. It's historic. I mean, Cristobal Torrente, for example, and the great Satchel Paige has a great storyline of his time in Cuba where he was playing to get they're playing for one political party. I mean, there's a lot of really good stories there, and the history of the game in Cuba goes so far back. Now, Australia's been playing baseball a long time, but it's a whole different animal. And I love to hear the stories of the different countries, especially in Cuba's case, because Cuba is fantastic, a storyline. And as a person growing up in North America, it was always right next door, but
a world away.
It was a forbidden place, and that they've been playing baseball as long as we have. And it goes back to the turn of the last century, and so many great storylines. And really they were ahead of race relations, so much more so than what we were in the States. And there's so many fantastic stories there. And from an Australian point of view, this is an opportunity because, again, I mentioned earlier, top 10 sports. I mean, footy is the national sport of Australia. Rugby is a huge deal in Australia. Cricket is a huge deal in Australia. Track and field's big. Swimming's huge in Australia. Anything outside's huge. But you mentioned the jerseys. There's been a growing trend of the North American sports growing in Australia. Basketball, for example, the NBL has had a really phenomenal growth spurt in in Australia playing basketball. Soccer, which is more global, but they've started slowly growing their brand as well over there. Women's sport is growing, softball, women's basketball. Those are all been growing, and baseball's still trying to play catch up. And something like this, some success where suddenly the TV, Channel 9 in Sydney will pick up and go, oh, well, the Team Australia is playing the quarterfinals against Cuba, and this is a big deal. And you're starting to see a little of that, but it's not quite the cultural ingrained thing like it is in Cuba or North America or Venezuela or whatever. And so this is a great opportunity for our game in Australia to get us more. And I'm saying front page news. We're never going to be footy. We know that. We're never going to be cricket. We know that, but we could possibly be, cricket times two, cricket part two. There's an opportunity there. If basketball can grow like it has in Australia, then baseball in gridiron, heck, football they call it over there, it's grown as well. I mean, you've got the Australians playing in the SEC and the Big 12 and all these places. Australians are playing sport in North America, and that's been the big thing. And they've always played, but we're never really got the story of our game, baseball, told like it should be in Australia. So the pressure is a little different. It's not so much the pressure on the team, it's the pressure on our game to grow our game. And this opportunity to grow our game is right there. A win on Thursday, win on Wednesday could go a long way, because suddenly you're going to Miami and, oh, this is a real deal. Team Australia is pretty good, by the way, right? I mean, we haven't been paying attention. Maybe we should. And this is going to catapult the ABL and grow, like I said, a kid in Brisbane who is watching going, hey, I want to be Tim Kennelly, I want to be that guy. And I think the pressure's different culturally, totally different but there's still pressure on both. I think, obviously Cuba with their pressure, but with Australia, it's just more for a game to grow the game. And Paul Morgan and I have been passionately pushing this game in Australia for 12 years now. This is a big opportunity for us. And so it's interesting, these storylines, because they're different. They're totally different, but they're fun and excites me just for what lies ahead. And win or lose is win or lose for Australia. This is a huge feather in the cap regardless.
And what I think a lot of times gets lost in the shuffle, maybe for good reason, because people don't necessarily want to worry about bureaucracy. But the WBC, the governing body, is obviously the WBSC, whose objective is to grow the game. And obviously MLB is very influential in it, have a lot of control. And the reason why the stories are exciting or more exciting is because of that MLB involvement. And fundamentally what we've seen is that the World Baseball Classic was a dream for it to become basically the love child of the World Cup and the dream team. And it looks like it's amalgamating some of that. And as you say, if a country like Australia can see and can grow, and the fact that we're talking about Great Britain, that it's important. It might seem like it's fleeting, but that for the clubs that are in those countries that are growing at that very small grassroots, it's always just momentum. But something as big as this, to look at it, to pin your hat on that, and then if the players that are there, especially the ones that do go back to Australia, next time some kid remembers him off of TV and wants to go see a game, or they get out in the community and start doing coaching sessions, and your pedigree is that much higher. The kid's looking and go, that means something, other than, it's cool, we respect that the guy's an athlete, but it truly, I think, adds to that pedigree. And so if you look at specifically what I think that this World Baseball Classic has already accomplished, and again, that variability, as much as, some people might look at and say a 5-team tie is a little bit ridiculous that it came down to that, but it is exciting that we're seeing different outcomes. It feels as if in most games, anything can happen. We're already talking about all of these, a few of these countries that we thought were going to cakewalk, that are looking at going and looking over their shoulder, and in Australia can get in there and can go further, and we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it probably does make the path a lot easier for a Japan, but we'll figure that out when you get there. Or if you are that team, figure it out when you get there. Play for that next game, but have something to wave your flag over, and hopefully grab more of those young kids that wouldn't have thought of picking up a baseball bat before and will now. So
that's exactly what the WBC is all about, right? And I think you guys nailed it about how both countries, they might be in great spots, but they have a lot still to do. I don't think I have any more questions. Tom, do you, or do you guys have anything that you wanted to bring up that we didn't get to?
I had some.
Go ahead, Tom. Sorry, Tom. Go ahead, Tom. Keep jumping on Tom. It's that Rays cap he's wearing.
He deserves
Whoa, that's a devil Rays cap, first of all.
Sorry about that. Yeah, old school.
It's a Curtis Mead hat.
I wanted to bring this up when you guys were talking about the history of baseball in the two countries, just real quick. Something that I heard since we had you on last time, Phil. I was talking to some of the guys on the Czech baseball Discord, and I asked them, like, dude, I'm really lost on this. How did baseball end up in the Czech Republic? And they told me that at first, I think it was an American, like a Czech American guy went over there and was like, hey, we play the sport. And there was a little bit of interest, and it was starting to grow. And then the Iron Curtain came down. Yep. And the guy told me that the Cubans like kind of picked up the torch, and like, because like baseball was seen as like it's a Western thing, specifically an American thing. The USSR and America at the time, many would say they were on the outs. But so like these Czech guys wanted to play baseball, and their only real option was the Cubans, because it was too late to make Cubans not play baseball at that point. So that was a little bit of Cuban baseball knowledge.
So that's interesting, and that's something that I haven't explored just yet. But also, I wonder, like you say, the obvious ties with the USSR, and whether or not might have been soldiers returning that have been to the island and potentially left some future ball players behind, but then maybe brought the game with Czechoslovakia, as we kind of discussed last time. That's why sometimes you see Vladimir and
right,
very, very rare, but occasionally you find blue eyes on the island, and you can probably trace the lineage of where that might have come from. So
yeah, you're like, that doesn't seem like a naturalized eye color. My last question. If you guys have anything you want to say before I go with my last question, because I'm gonna ask for predictions.
Okay, well, I want to just throw this out there to you three. Is Australia have any advantage in Tokyo? Do you think that I think there's a wild card here that the Japanese have been very accommodating to the Australians. Australia has a great relationship with baseball in Japan. The Australians really feel at home there. I'm wondering what that crowd will be like on Wednesday, and will it be a pro-Australian crowd? Because I mean, it's Cuba, obviously, not be a lot of road fans, and there won't be a lot of road fans from Australia either. That's not I mean, that's asking a lot for somebody to go from Australia to Japan, even though the same side of the world. But I'm just curious. I'm kind of thinking that it maybe a pro-Australian crowd which would be sort of a strange thing, I think.
I think it could go one of two ways. I think that there is more of a rivalry between Cuba and Japan, but don't the thing that could play in, and also be intrigued to see if the lineup changes accordingly to get Euros Belgraciel in there. We've already seen Ariel Martinez move in behind the plate, these guys that are playing in Japan, and then we mentioned the pitchers as well. So we saw in some of the tune-up games that the fans were very appreciative of an Alfredo de Spain and Euros Belgraciel, who played with SoftBank for a long time, and contracts weren't renewed. So I think there's potentially enough familiarity with the Cuban guys, or at least maybe they can kind of take the other guys that haven't been a part of that by the hand. We'll see. I don't know enough about that fan base, so maybe in that circumstance, maybe they're looking at it and they like an underdog story for the sake that they've got their home nation, which are heavily favored. So you can kind of scratch both itches and kind of look at it from the perspective of, hey, if I feel bad for being a front runner here, I'm able to cheer for these guys. I can still keep my street cred of cheering for an underdog there. So if the crowd, I assume, is going to be raucous. Again, hopefully those guys with the MPB experience aren't going to shy away from that, and the guys with the major league experience. So we will be I will be intrigued to see that. But again, hopefully it's packed and it is raucous. I think that's going to make for a great environment.
Well, they're great. They're great fans there in Japan, and this is not like going to the Bronx when you've got the Red Sox and Yankees. It's not going to be a lot of anything. These are respectful fans, even, and I've always grown just to love the Oceania fan of baseball. That I've no one affinity Yankees and Red Sox fans, but yeah, I've been on the road. Put it this way, I've been on the road to some games, and I've wish I wasn't the road team. Put it that way, but I don't think that's the case here. But anyway, good. I'd forgotten that angle of the NPB.
If I make a pro wrestling reference, will anybody get it if I say that it automatically gets 5 stars because it's in the Tokyo Dome? There's a famous pro wrestling writer, Dave Meltzer, who everybody gets on because he'll say anything that happened in WWE was crap, but the second that it's in the Tokyo Dome, it's automatically a 5-star match.
Right, right, which is basically just the old Metrodome with better outside, I think. But anyway, I didn't say that, but anyway.
Well, guys, this has been great. I don't want to take up any more of your night. Do you guys, Dan, why don't you plug, your show and your handles and everything you got going on, and then Phil, why don't you do that after Dan?
You bet. My broadcast partner in Perth, Paul Morgan, and I do a little venture called Talking Baseball Australia. We're baseball's best mate. We've been doing it. Started as a radio show back in 2011, and we've been fostering it ever since. It's a couple of blokes just talking baseball from Australian point of view. You want to hear us talk about the anything more than Australian baseball, but we're at Twitter. We're at TB Australia, and you can follow me on Twitter at Dan Vaughan Jr. That's VAUGHAN Jr. And then our Facebook page is just Talking Baseball Australia. We do a show during the regular baseball season, which is the U.S. winter, every Friday morning. And that comes on at 5 p.m. in North America Central Time, 7 a.m. in Perth. And we do all kinds of live stuff. We do broadcasts together. But that's the best way to find me, though. I'd love to follow you. If you follow me, I'll follow you right back. And looking forward to catching up with you folks worldwide. We are doing a show tomorrow, 5 o'clock Central Time in North America, to preview this ball game. That'll be on Facebook Live at Talking Baseball Australia. Again, baseball's best mate. That's our thing.
So, Phil, how about you? Plug anything you got going on and all your handles.
www.cubadugout.com, at Cuba Dugout, and going to be writing some drop some articles recently. But while we're on the topic of Australia, I would like to send a shout out to a lovely lady in Wollongong, in good friend Ann Morris, a supporter of our rugby community here in Ottawa, and want to say good day. And we're always thinking about Ian, her brother. So
Awesome.
Wollongong. I know where that is. Been there before. I know where it is. It's a pretty cool place.
Hope to make it there someday. So
yes.
All right, guys. So do you guys want to do predictions before we call it?
Sure.
All right. Let's start with Dan.
Oh, okay. I was hoping Phil would jump the plank first, but all good, mate.
No, and nobody put their foot forward. So
okay, well, it's like, I don't know if you ever been the guy that has to say the blessing and you look down, and that was kind of me right there. But
right.
This is an opportunity. I like what Phil said earlier. Playing on house money. It's kind of been the theory, the theme. Dave Nielsen had a conversation back in June when he was the hitting coach at Lake Country for the Dock Hounds, the American Association. We had a long conversation about what a big year this was, what was coming forward. And everything that we talked about over the course of the offseason and back into the ABL season has come to fruition. And the goal was to, A, be competitive, B, to make it into the next round, continue to climb and grow. And I think culturally, internally as a roster, these guys have been feeling this whole thing going back to last June. There's a lot of excitement about being part of this club and represent the national team, despite not a lot of folks knowing in their home country. I really believe in a one-game playoff, anything's possible. It is that NCAA time. So with that, I will tell you that what I like about this is the same reason I like Cuba, is that it's all hands on deck here within reason, because you've had a little time off. You're going to see every arm available because you can't play on until you win this one. So that gives me, it's almost like game 7. So I like that for both clubs pitching wise, but I do like this for Perth. This is the Perth. Sorry, for Australia. Got Perth on my mind there. I love the beautiful West. But I would tell you that with all the arms available for Australia, they're all available. I like this in a very, very close ball game. I like Australia in a very close ball game. Give me Australia 5-4 in a very close ball game. Very close ball game that is going to probably have multiple home runs, solo shots, because I can see these are situations where you're going to set in a fastball, you're going to take a crack. There won't be a lot of traffic on the bases, I don't think, and I'll take Australia 5-4 in a nail biter to go on to Miami. Now, granted, to take off my home cap, but
right.
Anyway, I really, and again, and I will be serious, and this is really serious. I do believe in these guys, and I believe in Dave Nielsen and his staff, and I believe this is the time. This is the classic moment for our game in Australia, and I believe this is the time that the game takes a huge step on its own merit, not bringing in Major League Baseball to Australia, but Australia on the world stage to grow the game, and I believe this is the classic moment for Australia.
All right.
I love it. This is their hour.
How about you, Phil? You want to tell him why he's wrong?
I think the pitching lines up. I think the adjustments at the plate have been made. I think that the depth is there, and I think that after that sputter start, they realize the new lease on life that they have. And I like Cuba 7-4. So there's one number we agree on. Just going in the opposite direction. But I like their chances. I think they're focused, and I think after shaking off that jet lag and that rust, I think that they're ready to do some damage and move on to Miami. And there's incentive to go to Miami as well. So,
all right, Ethan, you want to give us your rapid fire prediction?
Yeah, real fast. I'm sticking with my guys. Australia. I think they earned their spot here. They put a beat down on Korea, which nobody expected, and I think Cuba. I think they lucked their way into it. So I'm going with Australia. I'm going to go. I like Dan's idea of a 1-run game. I'm going to go 4-3. I think they're going to be able to get off the board, but they got to limit the walks. That was the one big bummer. How about you, Tom?
So my brain tells me Cuba, okay? And the reason I'm going with Australia is because every game where my brain thought I knew, the absolute opposite has happened. I'm like, oh, US over Mexico, that's an easy one. Korea over Australia, that's an easy one. So on and so forth. So I think Cuba has a stronger roster on paper, but that hasn't meant very much so far. The Australians are hot. The Cubans, they're not as cold as they were. So, it's not like it's a hot team going up against a team that just sort of like stumbled forward. So I'm gonna pick Australia just because I don't trust my brain. I'm going with my contrarian pick here. I'm thinking like 6-3. I'm thinking that you're gonna get like a big 3-run homer late, and it's gonna be it.
All right, Phil, you're in enemy territory. We got to call it quits. If we're wrong, you can come on and I don't know,
and flex
eyes on our face or something.
See, I wanted to back you. I said it. I don't trust myself anymore.
I went the emotional route, which as a Texas Tech Red Raider fan is not real good. So maybe Phil, you can feel pretty good about my emotional pick. But I did go the emotional route over the conventional roster. But I just once in a blue moon, I think emotion does play and does sometimes come through. That's where I went. So anyway,
right.
Phil, I was great to meet you, mate.
Likewise. And
All right,
sorry, just one. So you do work with the American Association, because we've got the Frontier League here in Ottawa. So and specifically, I think Sioux City picked up is it Jacob Sanford? So he's from my hometown originally, Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Then obviously was the kid that had the issues with some sticky fingers in the Yankees organization. But interesting to see him that he hasn't gotten back into affiliated, but I think he did damage here last year, and I think the game plays. So I know he's trying to rebuild his reputation to get back into affiliated. But
yeah, it's a unique route now. That used to be the independent league was sort of the pariah, but now kids can get back, or young players can get back to the affiliated ranks to independent ball. It's become a pathway. It's an extra pathway that wasn't around 25 years ago. Used to be you'd hear independent ball, people would kind of go, that's independent ball. But now it's pathway. It's a great. Both leagues are great.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. This has been awesome. Just like both leagues. Thanks for coming on, and we'll have you both on again to, I don't know, one of you can tell us we were wrong. So
squash the beef.
Hey, I'll be smoking a celebrity or a celebration cigar at 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning, I think. So,
all right, deal. Hey, thanks again, guys. I really appreciate it. I'll send you that episode.
Cheers,
guys. Thank you very much.
Cheers, man.
Phil, Dan, thank you guys both so much for coming on, for bearing with us because we're idiots, and for sharing your time. It was awesome to get both the Australian and Cuban perspective, although both of those guys are from North America. So it's the North American Australian and the North American Cuban perspective. But it was a lot of fun to have them on and share their expertise. We should try and get them on again to do a wrap up after the game, so that somebody can get pied in the face, because somebody's going to be wrong here. Interesting to see. Go follow Dan Vaughan at Dan Vaughan Jr. on Twitter, and go check out Talking Baseball Australia. That's great stuff. Obviously, Phil, CubaDugout.com. He's on Twitter at Cuba Dugout. So go follow both those guys. And Tom, you can follow us. Do you want to tell them where?
Let's see if I can remember it. You can follow us on Twitter, the under new management Twitter account at the Baseball Pod 2. And you can email us at thebaseballpod@gmail.com. Send us your hate mail, your love mail,
nudes.
Yeah, we'll take those. We will also reciprocate.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You know what? Yeah, we're going to do that. And then we're going to say, where is it?
No, you know what? We'll start with the nudes. If you hit us up and say nudes for nudes, we'll start.
Yeah. You want this to be
only fair. Yeah, come on. What kind of leader would ask someone to do what they're not willing to do?
This sounds like one of those things in like a magazine in like the 50s where you would send away for send away for your free, decoder ring. Send away for your free nudes of these two podcast hosts who have like 64 viewers. Guys, listen, we meant it, okay? Send us whatever kind of mail you want. We have already gotten hate mail, and frankly, it was some of the most riveting stuff I've ever read in my life. We've gotten requests for things that had nothing really to do with our podcast. Like,
Tom, wait, I have breaking news. I just got a DM.
Wait, let me hold on.
I want to play a game.
Tell him. That doesn't apply. I just got a DM from Phil. And I said to him, thanks for coming on. It was a blast. Here's Dan's handle if you want to connect with him. And Phil said back to me, it was good. Just let him know I'm funneling the scouting report straight to my people. I'm the secret weapon. I'm swinging this game.
Whoa. And listen,
a bit of intrigue at the end of this episode.
Phil did mention that he's going to be smoking a celebratory cigar.
Yeah.
I would like to add that he is probably the only one who could legally smoke a celebratory cigar. So
it sounds like Phil has a little bit of inside information here. Maybe we should tell the baseball authorities about this.
I don't want to rat him out. He's given us 2 great podcasts. We got to protect our sources.
That's a good point. That's a good point. But anyway, Phil, Dan, thanks for coming on. Go follow them. Go follow us. Go follow our personal Twitters. I'm Ethan Pachersky. You're something, Lord of Shade.
I'm at Lord of Shade 57.
Yeah.
It's so much like the Under New Management Baseball Podcast Twitter account in that I largely just trash things. So,
there's nothing wrong with that.
Listen.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
We're already going long. Let's wrap it up here. Everybody, thanks for listening.
Here we are.
And I hope you guys enjoyed this crossover episode between 2 great guys.
As always.
His name is Dan Island.
And he will see you on the next one.